Stand up right now and take 10 unhurried steps across whatever room you are in, and pay attention to the heel of your right foot the moment it touches the floor. That contact, repeated roughly 5,000 times a day in the body you were issued, is the single mechanical event that a growing body of research now treats as the most informative vital sign in geriatric medicine. Stephanie Studensky, working at the University of Pittsburgh and pooling data from 9 cohort studies covering 34,485 adults over 65, demonstrated that the speed at which a person crosses a 4-meter strip of corridor predicts 10-year survival more reliably than blood pressure, more reliably than smoking history, more reliably than the standard panel of chronic disease diagnoses combined. 1 meter per second is roughly the median. Below 0.6 meters per second, the survival curve drops sharply. Above 1.2 meters per second, the curve lifts beyond what the actuarial tables expect. The number is not a verdict and not a guarantee. It is a confession your entire physiology is making in the space of 4 meters of flat floor, because walking is the only act you perform that audits, in real time, every system the body uses to stay alive. To understand why a stride contains that much information, you have to look at what is happening from the ground up, beginning with the structure pressing against the floor right now. Your foot is not a paddle, it is a tensioned arch of 26 bones, 33 articulations, and a longitudinal sling of plantar fascia, and that arch behaves the way an engineer would describe a leaf spring. As your weight transfers onto the midfoot during the stance phase, the arch flattens by a few millimeters, storing elastic strain energy in the plantar aponeurosis. As you push off, the arch recoils and returns roughly 17% of the energy your muscles would otherwise have to supply. No other living primate possesses this configuration. The chimpanzee foot is a grasping organ. Yours is a spring. Cradled inside the soft tissue of that same sole, lying just beneath the skin you are currently standing on, is the plantar venous plexus, a dense reservoir of veins that empty upward each time the sole compresses against the ground. Anesthesiologists call this the foot pump, because in surgical patients its activity drops to zero and deep vein thrombosis risk climbs accordingly. At a normal cadence, you compress the plexus around 60 to 70 times per minute per foot, which is to say, each footfall is a hydraulic event that moves venous blood against gravity toward the right atrium of your heart. Standing does not produce this. Shifting weight does not produce this. Only the rhythmic loading and unloading of the sole against a surface produces this. The heaviness you feel in your calves after a long flight or a long afternoon at a desk is partly blood that has nowhere to go because the pump has not been switched on. Move up the leg and a second piece of machinery enters the analysis. The Achilles tendon connecting your gastrocnemius and soleus to the calcaneus is, relative to body mass, the thickest energy-storing tendon in any primate, and during each stride it functions almost exactly the way a bowstring does, stretching as the forefoot loads, releasing as you push off, returning around 35% of the work the calf would otherwise spend. Stack the arch and the tendon together, and you have already recovered more than half of the energy cost of locomotion before any voluntary muscular effort is counted. The remainder is governed by something stranger, an inverted pendulum. As your planted leg straightens and your center of mass rises over the supporting foot, gravitational potential energy accumulates. As your weight tips past vertical and falls forward, that potential energy converts to kinetic energy that carries you into the next step. The exchange is roughly 65% efficient, which is why a healthy adult can walk for hours on a bowl of oatmeal and why bipedal robots still struggle to imitate the dynamic with comparable economy. Your cerebellum manages the entire choreography, modulating stride length, foot placement, ankle stiffness, and trunk lean against terrain, wind, and load without ever surfacing the calculation into your conscious awareness. The pace at which all of this synchronizes most efficiently is the pace that, when you stop thinking about it, your body chooses on its own. That comfortable walking speed is not a preference. It is a resonance condition determined by leg length, body mass, and the gravitational field at the surface of the planet you are standing on. Daniel Lieberman at Harvard has spent his career arguing that this entire architecture, The spring arch, the long Achilles, the nuchal ligament that steadies your skull during forward motion, the gluteus maximus that contributes almost nothing to quiet standing but fires powerfully during stride, the 2 to 4 million eccrine sweat glands distributed across your skin in densities unmatched by any other mammal, was selected for endurance locomotion across hot, open ground. Persistence hunting, the practice still documented among some Kalahari sand communities, depends on a single asymmetry. Quadrupedal mammals dump heat by panting, and panting cannot be performed at a gallop. Humans dump heat through evaporative sweat while continuing to move. The prey was always faster over short distances. The human was always cooler over long ones. 6 to 9 miles per day was the calibrated daily mileage of the Pleistocene body. Agricultural workers through the medieval period covered comparable distances. Your great-grandparents covered most of them. The average American over 65 now covers between 3,000 and 4,000 steps, a mile and a half on a generous day. The body that was tuned to 9 receives 1.5. A great deal of what gets diagnosed as aging, the morning stiffness, the swelling at the ankle by evening, the back that locks after sitting, the cognitive haze that thickens through a winter spent indoors, maps less to the calendar than to the pedometer. Geriatricians call this deconditioning, the predictable physiological response to chronic mechanical understimulation, and it is largely indistinguishable in presentation from senescence itself. It looks like aging. It is treated as aging. It is not aging. It is a body responding accurately to the input it is receiving, which is almost none. The first system to register this is the skeleton, and the mechanism is more peculiar than most clinicians describe. Bone is piezoelectric. When you load a vertebra or a femur, the hydroxyapatite crystals embedded in the collagen matrix generate a small electrical potential along the lines of mechanical strain, and that potential is read by osteocytes buried inside the bone as a deposition signal. The same physical effect runs quartz watches and the spark in a gas lighter. In your skeleton, it tells osteoblasts where to lay down new mineral. Julius Wolff described the macroscopic pattern in 1892. Bone remodels along trajectories of stress and thins where stress is absent. The piezoelectric current is the mechanism beneath Wolff's law, and walking provides the loading pattern the skeleton evolved to interpret as a build signal. Astronauts in microgravity lose between 1 and 2% of bone density per month, not because orbit is intrinsically toxic, but because the gravitational loading that generates the signal is gone. Bedridden patients lose at the same rate on the same timeline. The diagnosis of osteopenia after 60 is, among other things, a chronic deficit of piezoelectric current in a structure that was designed to receive it through heel strike. The same stillness that quiets the skeleton also stalls the fluid systems, and this is where the engineering becomes most exposed. Your lymphatic vasculature has no central pump. There is no lymphatic heart. Lymph is moved by external compression of one-way valved vessels by the surrounding skeletal muscle, which is to say, lymph moves when you move and pools when you do not. Your calf muscles, contracting and releasing through the stance phase of each step, are sometimes called the second heart for this reason, and the description is mechanically accurate. Sit still for 6 hours, and the lymphocytes meant to be patrolling your peripheral tissues are instead settling in the interstitial spaces of your lower legs. Your intervertebral discs solve a parallel problem in a parallel way. They are avascular. They have no direct blood supply and depend entirely on imbibition, a slow exchange of fluid driven by cyclical loading and unloading of the spine. Walking compresses and decompresses each disc roughly once per stride. The compression pushes metabolic waste out. The decompression draws nutrient-rich fluid back in. Sitting holds the disc in sustained compression with no exchange, which is why the lumbar stiffness after a long meeting eases within a few minutes of standing and walking. The disc is rehydrating. Your fascia, the connective sheets that envelop every muscle, every organ, and every neurovascular bundle, behaves similarly. It is a hydrated colloidal matrix that requires mechanical pumping to maintain its viscoelastic properties, and overnight stillness leaves it measurably stiffer at dawn than it was at dusk. The first 10 minutes of a morning walk are largely fascial rehydration. Peristalsis, the wave of smooth muscle contraction that moves chyme through your gut, is itself entrained by ambulation. Constipation in older adults correlates more tightly with daily step count than with fiber intake. blood, lymph, cerebrospinal fluid, synovial fluid, disc imbibition, fascial hydration, gut transit. Each of these fluid systems was specified for a body that walks, and each of them degrades in a body that does not from pathology, but from the absence of the mechanical input the system was calibrated to receive. The most consequential discovery of the last 20 years, though, was made above the neck. For most of the 20th century, neuroscience taught that the adult human brain produced no new neurons and that hippocampal atrophy in the elderly, declining at roughly 1 to 2% of volume per year past 60, was irreversible. Kirk Erikson at the University of Pittsburgh challenged that assumption directly. In a randomized controlled trial published in 2011 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, he assigned 120 sedentary adults averaging 67 years of age either to a walking program of 40 minutes 3 times per week or to a stretching control. After 1 year, structural MRI showed the stretching group's hippocampi had continued to shrink along the expected trajectory, while the walking group's hippocampi had grown by approximately 2% in volume, a reversal of roughly 1 to 2 years of age-related atrophy. 2% of the seat of your declarative memory regained, not preserved, regained, on the dose of 3 neighborhood walks a week. The mechanism is well evidenced. Sustained moderate exercise raises serum and central concentrations of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a polypeptide that promotes the survival of mature neurons, the formation of new synapses, and most strikingly, the proliferation and integration of new neurons in the dentate gyrus, the small inward curl of cortex at the hippocampal entrance that the consensus had said could not regenerate. Pharmaceutical companies have invested heavily in finding small molecules that cross the blood-brain barrier and raise BDNF, because a reliable BDNF agonist would be one of the most valuable drugs in geriatric psychiatry. Your body manufactures the molecule for free in response to 40 minutes of walking 3 times a week, and the increase is comparable in magnitude to what the pharmaceutical candidates aim for. The action is free, the molecule is identical. Balance is the next system the Stride audits, and here the evidence shelf is also robust. Postural stability is a real-time fusion of 3 afferent streams: vision, vestibular input from the semicircular canals and otoliths of your inner ear, and proprioception, the position and load sense generated by mechanoreceptors in your joint capsules, muscle spindles, Golgi tendon organs, and the Pacinian and Ruffini endings scattered through the soles of your feet. Proprioception calibrates through use. A foot that has not negotiated an uneven sidewalk in a month has receptors that have been firing into a stationary, predictable surface, and their threshold sensitivity drifts. The fall risk that climbs after 60 is not purely a story of declining muscle mass. A significant portion of it is proprioceptive decalibration, sensors that have lost their training data. Walking on varied terrain, grass, gravel, gentle slopes, curbs, is itself the recalibration. Every step on uneven ground is a small perturbation that the cerebellum has to resolve before the next heel strike, and each resolution refines the system. No flat gym floor reproduces this. Bring all of these threads back to the 4-meter strip Studensky measured. Gait speed is not itself the cause of survival. It is the integrated readout of every system the body uses to move forward against gravity. Cardiac output to deliver oxygen, pulmonary gas exchange to supply it, skeletal muscle to generate force, bones to bear it, joints to articulate it, a peripheral and central nervous system to coordinate dozens of muscles in firing sequences accurate to a few milliseconds, a cerebellum to balance against perturbation, a frontal cortex to sustain the intention to keep moving. When any one of those systems falters, the body protects itself by slowing. No blood panel summarizes that. No imaging study summarizes that. 4 meters of corridor summarizes it. This is the calibration of the evidence worth being honest about. The Studensky meta-analysis and the Erikson hippocampal trial are both strongly evidenced, randomized, or pooled across tens of thousands of person years and replicated by independent groups. The piezoelectric mechanism in bone is well established at the bench and consistent with Wolff's law clinically, though the exact dose-response curve for older adults remains an area of active calibration. The plantar venous plexus and the calf muscle pump are uncontroversial in vascular surgery. The fascial hydration story is physically plausible and consistent with imaging of tissue water content, but is less directly measured in humans than the cardiovascular and skeletal endpoints, and you should hold it on the lower shelf accordingly. The persistence hunting account of human endurance evolution is Lieberman's strongest line of argument and is well supported by comparative anatomy, but specific adaptive narratives about any single anatomical feature are always partly inferential. None of this changes the practical conclusion, because the practical conclusion is what is left after the speculative claims are removed, and what is left is still substantial. Walk for 10 minutes today, and the plantar plexus and the calf pump activate within the first stride, and venous return improves measurably before you sit back down. Walk consistently for a week, and fascial hydration improves at dawn, peristalsis normalizes, and the morning stiffness shortens. Walk consistently for 3 weeks, and resting heart rate drops a few beats per minute as stroke volume rises, and the same loop around the block leaves you less breathless, which is not motivation but cardiac adaptation. Walk consistently for a month, and proprioceptive thresholds in your ankles begin to sharpen. Walk consistently for 6 months, and the piezoelectric signal has begun to tip the osteoblast-osteoclast balance back toward deposition, and BDNF-driven hippocampal neurogenesis has begun to register on structural MRI in studies like Erickson's. The sequence is not motivational, it is mechanical. The body is not asking for belief, it is asking for steps. Take the 10 steps you took at the beginning of this and notice now what was happening in them. The arch under your heel was storing strain energy. The plexus in your sole was pumping blood toward your chest. Your Achilles was loading and releasing. Your center of mass was rising and falling through an inverted pendulum 65% efficient. Your hydroxyapatite was generating a small voltage along the lines of strain. Your cerebellum was running thousands of corrections per minute below the threshold of awareness. The 4-meter test was being administered in private, and the score was being recorded. The prescription Hippocrates wrote, "Walking is man's best medicine," was correct for reasons he could not have known, and that the body has been waiting, quietly, to demonstrate. Stand up again. Take the steps. The machine is still calibrated. It is still waiting.